For those who've not read the article, it concerns the phenomenon of monatomic elements derived from gold and platinum group metals. And these are the enigmatic white powder substances which are obtained by chemical or electronic means from metals that fall into specific elemental categories. Also included are other not so precious metals, including things like copper, cobalt, nickel. They fall into the category as well. These can also be transmuted to the monatomic state. Monatomic, of course, one atom, single atom. That's why it's a powder. And the ancient Mesopotamians refer to this as highwood firestone, shemana. It's interesting because the word highwood is still retained in the modern scientific descriptions of the substance. In Egypt, they called the powder mufkuts, which is a non-word. It has no vowels in it, and I usually add a couple of U's just to make it something which can be said. M-F-K-Z-Z-T, mufkuts. The Greeks classified the attributes of these enigmatic powders as goetic or goeticus. And the word meant magical action. And it's from that term, goetic, that derived the term used in certain forms of medieval architecture which became called Gothic. And the word comes from Gothic, magical action, sometimes related to the law of plant or insect organisms, because it seems to work in much the same way. Scientifically, the monatomic state occurs when the time reverse and the time forward electrons of the substance correlate around the nucleus so that they're all travelling in the same direction instead of going in opposite directions. And what happens is that this shocks the metal. When activated, these particular Meissner fields will repel all other magnetic fields. And so they become in themselves diamagnetic. They become repulsive. They push back. A state in which it repels these other magnetic fields clearly gives rise to one of the main attributes of the powders, which was written about so long ago, it's almost unbelievable, and which scientists are now coming to terms with again. This form of repulsion of the Earth's magnetic field itself leads to the immediate possibility of levitation. Now, the interesting thing about that is that it leads to other quite extraordinary possibilities, because it works in exactly the same way as copying and pasting on your PC. If you have an image or a piece of text and you copy it, let's say you don't copy it, let's say you cut it, because we're looking here really at cut and paste. We're going to move it from there to here. You cut it there, you've digitized the measurements of it, and you're going to recreate that over here. So what happens is that you simply press the button and the piece of gold that was there now appears over here. That's magical enough, but there's more to it than that. Because rather like straightforward copy and cut and paste on a computer, the paste aspect of it can be paste, 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 paste. You can carry on reproducing it. So you might start off with one piece of gold. You can actually reproduce it as a number of pieces that are all clones of the individual starting one. So it's really quite remarkable the way that it NASA works. Has written, "This is the stuff of Star Trek's teleportation of matter by way of a light beam. A molecular pattern of a body is automatically rearranged and sent to another destination." It's hardly surprising, therefore, that the science of superconducting, levitation, transportation of matter, even the manipulation of space-time itself are now right at the forefront of this sort of research. It's especially the case in certain projects fronted by the US Department of Defense and indeed by Britain's Ministry of Defense. There are projects now underway that bind these two governmental institutions together absolutely in terms of money, shared research and shared projects on both sides of the water. And this research, in fact, is one of the primary factors which appears now to be bonding the American and British governments together in military terms in a way that many of us don't quite understand why. Neither can now function without the other. The UK Ministry of Defence is now entirely dependent on the US Department of Defence and vice versa. It came about. If we can pick up space-time, if we can manipulate and bend space-time, and we can move space-time, then there is nothing to say that instead of worrying about our spacecraft, we can't simply pick up the space-time in front of it and move it behind it. Unusual, but it got taken up. It was subsequently expanded as a theory and upheld further in various magazines and journals, the American Scientist being one of them. And what it said was that when in warp mode, such a spacecraft would be in a situation where the acceleration potentially is enormous, absolutely enormous, but it would be absolutely zero. It wouldn't move at all. It would stay exactly where it was. The Ohio Aerospace Institute then explained that the concept relies on the premise that, of course, space isn't empty. It has a shape that can be distorted, a shape that they are now learning how to distort. Starships, they said, would simply rest in a bubble, a warp bubble between these two space-time dimensions. But the interesting thing is that because of the way it would be done, there would be no difference in the time frame within the bubble than that outside. So anybody in this particular craft, they reckon, would not be affected in any way by Einstein's time dilation effect. They would remain in the same space-time. NASA then came along and wrote in an interview article in a newspaper, more for the layman, and what they said was that it would operate in much the same way as a moving sidewalk operates at an airport. Two people come along and they're walking through the arena. One chooses the moving sidewalk and the other doesn't. They move at exactly the same speed. They're walking at the same speed, but the person on the moving sidewalk will get to the other end quicker, simply because there's another energy force propelling him or her. But, irrespective of that, when at the other end eventually, they're still both in the same time frame. The faster one hasn't moved into any different sort of time zone. So that turned out to be useful knowledge to everyone, because they were very frightened that actually you could actually find that you came back to Earth afterwards and found that thousands of years had gone past. Well, apparently not so. That won't happen. At the same time, as I mentioned before, we've got institutions particularly concerned about anti-gravity. And in some cases, the two things are brought together, anti-gravity and superconductive access to parallel dimensions. Aircraft, monatomic substances derived from noble metals exist. 10 years ago, they were doubtful. Now they all acknowledge the existence. The Platinum Metals Review and indeed other journals have actually featured many articles now about the use of these metals, these atoms, in the use of cancer treatment. One ruthenium atom placed at the end of a DNA strand will dismantle that DNA strand. It will cause it, when removed, to rebuild itself again correctly. Not as it was, correctly in accordance with its original memory. Think of that in terms of cancer treatment. Cancer is nothing more than deformed DNA, malformed cells. Carry it on. So I think we're going to see a change of companies, but I think there'll always be somebody trying to move this forward in a manner which is acceptable to the buying public, rather than the extortionate way that governments are now endeavouring to use this fascinating new science. Thank you. very much. Thank you very much. Okay. Pleasure. Thank you. Never too good.
St. George and the Dragon. St. George and the Dragon is actually, he's the Red Cross knight, and red is heraldically, red is the colour of gold. So the Red Cross is the same as the Gold Cross, and his other symbol is the rose. So St. George and the Dragon is the Rosicrucian, the Rose Cross Knight, or Golden and Rose Cross Knight, to give the full name. In his Symbola Aurea Mensae, published in Frankfurt in 1617, Meyer explains that in 1570, immediately after the excommunication of Queen Elizabeth I by the Pope, a revival of ancient societies, such as that of the Magi of Persia, Brahmins of India, and Gymnosophites of Ethiopia, took place under the denomination of the Brothers of the Golden Rose Cross. In his Themis Aurea, published in Frankfurt in 1618, he states that the Brothers of RC exist to advance inspired arts and sciences, including alchemy, and that, to quote, the Temple of the Rosy Cross is located beside Helicon on double-peaked Parnassus, where Pegasus opened a fountain of perennial water. It's very poetic, really. And they did speak poetry, the good writers. And the reason was double reason for it. But according to Greek mythology, Parnassus was sacred to Apollo and Athena, as also to Dionysus and the Dionysian mysteries, which were practiced at Eleusis. And the two peaks, Parnassus is a mountain with two peaks, which look like two pyramids. The two peaks of Parnassus were the seats of Apollo and Athena, a double throne, Apollo on one, Athena on the other. And I'm going to come to this later, but roughly in terms of letters, they're like two A's. And the names of Apollo and Athena both begin with A, and so on. And this is one of the big keys to the Rosicrucian fraternity.
Einstein, go, go.